Spy Family is one of those incredible stories that just comes out of nowhere and takes the world by storm. Even people who avidly hate and despise anime have dropped their prejudices to enjoy this family-centered rom-com adventurous spy thriller. There's a sense of charm and magic to Spy Family in both the manga and the anime that just pulls people into its story. And of course, this has prompted a veritable flood of reviews and analysis videos. But I want to take a different approach. In a mini-series of 3 different videos, I will look at a few aspects of Spy Family's story that most other AniTubers and analysts have completely missed or don't fully understand. These videos will focus on the story's incredible Cold War world building, and the way Spy Family flips the found family trope on its head, and finally the unexpected flow and pacing of the entire story, something which doesn't seem to really fit what's being told, and yet it works. Now, with that being said, let's dive into the Cold War world of Spy Family with Camille's Harem. Not just a podcast for novice writers by novice writers, but also a YouTube channel by novice writers for novice writers, because writing is an adventure, it's more fun with friends. In this first video, I will specifically focus on the Cold War world building within the series, and how this much darker atmosphere highlights the wholesomeness of the Forger family. And from there, I will shift gears to what we can learn about borrowing from real and historical events to inspire our stories. Here's my first bold claim. If you watch this video through to the very end, you will want to research the history of the Cold War. My second bold claim is this: we care so much about the Forger family's relationships and happiness, not just because they deserve it, but because their lives are framed around a geopolitical situation saturated in blood, with the fates of countless people hanging in the balance. The stakes are impossibly high, and yet they are made personal because we see Anya, Lloyd, and Yor all stand to personally lose big if anything disturbs the fragile peace between the East and the West. Furthermore, all their lives are screwed up because of how this Cold War between Westalis and Ostania has gobbled them up, turned them into freak experiments, orphan spies, and merciless killers. While much of the story does focus on the happiness that they are surprised to find with each other, along with all the pains, frustrations, and uncertainties that come with being in a family, all of that normal life stuff is undercut and threatened by the dangers of their own fictional Cold War. And what shocked me as I read the manga is how fantastically Spy Family uses real events and people of the Cold War era to create the many dangers and situations that the Forgers continue to tumble into. Now, these events and adaptations are not a perfect one-for-one translation, but I will show how what we see in the anime and manga are indeed inspired by real events and people, and then we will see how these dangers enhance the story's wholesomeness. So, firstly, and most obviously, Westalis and Ostania are stand-ins for America and the Soviet Union, but more specifically, they are the two halves of Germany after the Second World War. And for crying out loud, the story takes place in the capital city of Berlin. Not much subtlety there. We get even greater context for this, though, in Lloyd's flashback, where we see Spy Family's version of the Second World War play out, destroying the two nations and the lives of the people who participated in the conflict. But it's what happens afterwards where things really get fun. The Berlin Wall, when you have a look at this, only bisected the city of Berlin, and the Iron Curtain was not an actual iron and steel wall dividing Europe. Rather, it was an ironclad boundary between geopolitical rivals, a border that was frequently crossed, however, by politicians, refugees, smugglers, and most notoriously, spies. This is the backdrop that provides much of the drama that Lloyd Forger and his organization WISE have to deal with. For example, in episode 2, Agent Twilight has to deal with a ring of international smugglers. Later on, Yor has to keep a crime syndicate family safe as they flee Ostania and seek asylum in a third-party nation. And currently in the manga, WISE has to deal with a rogue agent Wheeler freely moving in and out of Westalis, sharing information. All of this travel and danger is made possible by a very real, serious border that is not secured with its own ridiculous Maginot Line. And aside from the meaning and dangers of a border drawn taut with the threat of war, there are numerous groups and events in Spy Family that have clear callbacks to events and people that wrought havoc during the Cold War. So, in no other particular order, we have Episode 1's opening, with a political assassination right out of the Basque Handbook. During the Cold War, the Basque in northern Spain were infamous for their political assassinations. In 1973, they pulled off the biggest and most terrifying political murder by killing the fascist Prime Minister Luis Carrero Blanco. I probably mispronounced that, and I'm very sorry. They tunneled under the road and packed the area under just one manhole full of explosives. When they saw Blanco's car stuck in traffic, they detonated their bomb, shooting Blanco and his car more than 5 stories high in a fierce fireball. This assassination had a massive impact on fascist Spain, which in turn led to serious ramifications on a geopolitical level. Then there's Agent Twilight's greatest nemesis, the SSS. They are a direct reference to East Germany's Staatssicherheitsdienst, or more commonly referred to as the Stasi. They bugged people's homes and had reports on literally everyone, and they used brutal tactics of coercion, intimidation, and subterfuge to terrify the East German populace into obedience. And yes, you could be arrested for something as ridiculous as being suspiciously unmarried, especially if you're a woman. Your fears are therefore not entirely unfounded, though it is hammed up for comedy's sake. But in old East Germany, and throughout the Soviet Union for that matter, this could have definitely have happened. All their terror that was wrought by the Stasi was done in the name of counter-espionage to keep people safe. And as crazy as it sounds, Lloyd and Nightfall's mission to retrieve stolen plans hidden in a painting, including dealing with underground gambling, sports, and super wealthy magnates, is right out of the United States' own crazy missions to infiltrate Russia and make Soviets defect. There are so many crazy programs that the United States undertook to deliver crippling blows to the Soviet Union's public relations, which never went much of anywhere, just like Twilight's hunt for the Zacharis dossier. The filings of these experiments that would expose Estonia for war crimes and human experiments. There's actually, however, a really hilarious CIA covert operation called Aerodynamic, and I'll leave a link to that crazy operation in the description. You might see some really funny connections between what happens in Spy Family with what actually happened in real life. Then, in Spy Family's core number 2, the students in Berlin want to assassinate a visiting Westalice ambassador and reignite the war. This devious plan of theirs is very reminiscent of 2 movements. Most people will obviously point to the guerrilla tactics made popular by communist and freedom fighter Che Guevara, but less well known would be the Prague Uprising, when Czech students and intellectuals protested against the Soviet Union. Spy Family brings these two together in a kind of what-if scenario of what if the Prague students and intelligentsia had used ingenious, brutal guerrilla tactics to begin a revolt that they hoped would usher in a better age. Then, in the manga, the side story about a defecting opera singer was something that happened on many occasions in real life, both from the West and the East. Celebrities, artists, soldiers, and businessmen would use their connections and their appearances of diplomacy to openly cross borders and then defect to other countries. And one arc that I'm so excited to see get animated is You're Protecting the Gretchens, a criminal family. This is right out of America's less than stellar Cold War history. Just as with the gardener keeping balance in Ostania by preserving even unsavory relationships between the government and criminal underworld, the CIA built up and protected numerous cartels and terrorist organizations in order to fight against the spread of communism. So long as those groups benefited the United States, they would be left alone and even sustained by the CIA. It's such a fun arc, however, in the manga to see Yor being a good mother and assassin as she tries to protect this crime syndicate, and most particularly the widowed wife and her last remaining child, as all these other assassins from the Ostanian underworld come to eliminate them. But her actions ultimately support a crime syndicate that has done awful things for Ostania, and many agents in real life were used by the CIA to do similarly horrible things, all in the name of some greater good. Hence why this is such a fun theme to play around with when you have any story dealing with black ops and the deep state. And for my last example, to avoid making this video way too long, let's have a look at Anya's kidnapping in the manga. This is right out of the Baader-Meinhof-Gruppe's playbook. For those who don't know, the Baader-Meinhof-Gruppe was an organization of radical domestic terrorists within Germany who wanted to overthrow the government by taking high-profile hostages, making their demands, and then assassinating their hostages. They were a bloody group that terrified the German public until they were finally caught. The people who kidnapped Anya and her classmates are not just aiming to make some crazy demands of Ostania's government, but they want to drive home the point of what they are doing by killing all of the children. So there you have it, just some examples of how Spy Family draws from very real things that happened during the Cold War. And if before this video you thought that the Cold War was a boring subject in history, hopefully this now gives you some motivation to dive deeper into that insane era of world history, because it was just far more than America and Russia glaring down at each other from their respective nuclear barrels. Spy Family is not so much inventing fun spy hijinks and adventures then out of whole cloth, but so much as taking inspiration from the darker and nuttier moments of the 20th century history. Now, a lot of that darkness is tempered by the humor, the action, and wholesome dynamic of the Forger family. And I'll get more to what really lies at the core of the Forger family's incredible and endearing and wholesome dynamic in my next Spy Family video, but there's some important stuff that I will note right here. The world of Spy Family is incredibly dangerous. There are tons of factions looking to use violence to change or preserve their world. In order for Operation Strix, the plan to preserve peace between Westeros and Ostania, to succeed, the Forger family has to be as quote-unquote normal as possible. Anya needs her parents, who also need her to have a healthy school, family, and social life. None of them can allow the others to die, so many of their shenanigans and adventures are about exploring what it means to be a family while preserving that family. Many families were torn apart by the events of the Cold War. Having this one family of oddballs fight back and do their best for each other, even if it is sometimes for selfish or ulterior motives, gives the audience a sense of hope. We root for them, we want them to succeed, and at the center of their success is the strength of their relationship. Because at the end of the day, that extra oomph for maintaining the Forger family is what helps Anya, Yor, and Lloyd overcome their many challenges within their own Cold War. So, what is some good writing advice that authors can get out of this one aspect of Spy Family? I would argue this: that you can draw, and that you probably should draw, inspiration from history. Let's say you're writing a mystery. Look into some real-world crime stories and draw some inspiration from them. What if you want to write a story about spies, like Spy Family? Look into the real world of spies. And I will say this, search out the stuff that isn't mainstream. Go looking for the stories that have just kind of been buried beneath what the media really played up, because you will find some truly insane and entertaining stuff that also opens up a whole new window into what the world of spies is actually like. Or let's say you want to write a book that deals a lot with certain social issues. Do your research and dive into the dirty history of that particular subject. Real life is often far crazier and more gripping than your basic fictional stories. Understanding these moments and adapting them or drawing inspiration from them will make your stories, your worlds, and your characters far deeper and more interesting. As a personal example, in my book Tumble Teller, there's a small part where the main character Mikulirian dreams about going to the free city of Lightfall to perform and make loads of money there. I drew inspiration from the German free cities, which were cities that kicked out their kings, their princes, and their dukes, and were ruled instead by guilds and elected officials. And monarchs eventually allowed these cities to stay free because it was good for business. In my fantasy world of Draconia, the dragons control everything. However, by letting some cities remain quote-unquote free, the dragons are able to use them as hubs of commerce to grow their own hordes of wealth. And they can use these free cities as distractions, so younger dragons will go and attack these far richer free cities, thereby giving the older, more powerful dragons a chance to relax and not have to fight these younger dragons over their own hordes. So to reiterate, what I'm doing right here is not a one-for-one representation or likeness of actual events, just like what we see in Spy Family, but it is an original creation based on something real, and that gave me a foundation to build on in order to further develop my own fantasy world. You can easily do the same, so you don't have to continuously pressure yourself to come up with something 100% original. And it will draw those people who have a knowledge of those real-world events and things to your stories, because they will, hopefully, appreciate what you've done with that information. Well, that will do it for this video. If you like what I talked about here and want more Spy Family goodness, make sure you've subscribed and clicked the bell icon to be notified for when that next video will come out. And if you're looking for more writing advice, please check out our other videos or head on over to our podcast, Camille's Harem. And if you would especially like to support what we do, then please consider purchasing one of our books. Links for them are in the description below. Thank you for joining us on this thrilling adventure that we call writing, and until the next video, y'all, tschüss.